They drag a loving father into handcuffs, accusing him of kidnapping his own daughter. For hours later, the truth came out, and it shook everyone who had judged him. David Carter woke up that Saturday morning with a rare sense of excitement. As a single father, every day was a balancing act between long hours at the auto shop and making sure his 8-year-old daughter, Maya, never felt the emptiness of losing her mother. Today, though, was different. He had promised her a whole day at the amusement park, a place she had been dreaming about for months. Maya was buzzing with joy as she slipped her small hand into his, chattering about which rides she wanted to try first. Dressed neatly in his worn denim jacket, David smiled at her energy, feeling proud of the bond they shared. Yet, as they stepped onto the subway, he noticed the familiar weight of curious stares. Strangers glanced at him and Maya, then at each other, their eyes filled with unspoken assumptions. David had experienced this before. The way people sometimes questioned how a black man could be alone with a little girl who had lighter features like her late mother. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on Maya's laughter as she pointed at the posters on the train wall. But unease stirred when a woman across the aisle began whispering into her phone, her suspicious gaze fixed on them. Moments later, another passenger leaned toward the conductor, gesturing in David's direction. David's chest tightened. He knew the signs. Judgment was turning into something more dangerous. Within minutes, the train jolted to a stop and 2 uniformed officers stepped in, scanning the crowd until their eyes locked on him. The passengers' chatter turned to hushed murmurs, all eyes narrowing. Maya clutched his arm, frightened, as one officer said sharply, "Sir, we need to talk. There's been a report of a possible child abduction." The words cut through him like a blade. In seconds, his perfect day with his daughter had turned into a nightmare.
As the black SUV pulled away from the station, Marcus sat silently in the back seat, the city passing in blurred streaks of light. The 2 agents said little, speaking only in short, coded exchanges over their earpieces. After a few minutes, the taller one turned to Marcus. "The director wants you on a secure line as soon as we reach headquarters. This incident is already being escalated." Marcus gave a slow nod, his mind working through every detail of the past few hours. The agents weren't just escorting him, they were shielding him. Across town, in that cramped interrogation room, the cops who had humiliated him were beginning to realize what they'd done. A phone on the desk rang. The sergeant answered, his face draining of color as he listened. "Yes, sir. I understand. Yes, immediately." When he hung up, his voice was tight. "Get me every report on Marcus Reynolds. Now." One of the younger officers whispered, "Who is he?" No one answered. Back in the SUV, Marcus finally spoke. "They treated me like I was nothing. That's not going to slide." The agent in the passenger seat met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "It won't. The department is already under investigation. Your call just moved it to top priority." 10 minutes later, they pulled into a secure underground garage. Marcus was led into a sleek, glass-walled office where a phone sat waiting. He picked it up, and the voice on the other end was firm. "Marcus, I've read the preliminary report. Those officers crossed every line. I'm authorizing a full internal sweep, effective immediately." Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. This wasn't revenge, it was accountability, and it was about to happen fast. Outside the office, agents began moving with purpose. Somewhere in a police station across town, the countdown to their reckoning had just begun.
David was led off the train under 100 watching eyes, every stare cutting into him like a blade. The officers marched him into a cramped station office, the kind with buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee. Maya was made to sit in a separate chair, her small body shaking as she tried to understand why her daddy, the man who tucked her in every night, was suddenly being treated like a stranger. One officer began asking her questions, his tone unusually soft, yet still carrying doubt. "Sweetheart, do you know this man? What's his name?" Maya looked at them in disbelief, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's my dad. His name is David Johnson. He makes me pancakes every Saturday." Her words were full of truth, But the officers exchanged skeptical glances, more focused on the complaint than the reality before them. Meanwhile, David was asked to explain himself again and again, as if his calm answers were rehearsed lies. His driver's license and Maya's birth certificate, both in his wallet, were temporarily brushed aside until they could verify further. The humiliation was unbearable. For hours, he was treated as a suspect rather than a father, forced to sit in silence while whispers and doubtful stares chipped away at his dignity. Maya eventually crossed the room, running into his arms despite the officer's protests, burying her face in his chest. "Don't let them take me, Daddy," she sobbed. David's throat tightened, but he held her firmly, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere, baby. I promise." In that moment, his anger transformed into resolve. He knew the truth was on his side, but it wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about showing the world the cost of judging a father not by his love, but by his skin. As the long hours dragged on, the station grew heavier with tension until a stern-looking officer entered holding a thick file of verified documents. The room quieted when he placed it on the desk. "We've confirmed everything," he said flatly, glancing at David and then at Maya, who was still clutching her father's hand. "Birth records, school documents, photographs. This is his daughter." A hush spread through the room, but David didn't feel relief. Only a sharp sting of anger at how long it had taken for the truth to matter. Another officer, clearly uneasy, tried to cover the mistake with weak words. "We had to follow procedures, sir." David's eyes burned as he rose from his chair, his voice steady but cutting. "Procedure? You humiliated my daughter. You made a little girl cry because you couldn't imagine a father like me could exist." The silence in the room deepened, guilt flickering across a few faces. Maya pressed closer to him, her eyes wide, but shining with pride at the strength in his voice. At that moment, a woman rushed into the station, a social worker who had been called for a possible child rescue. She froze when she saw David holding Maya with tenderness only a parent could show. "This is a mistake," she said quickly, turning on the officers. "I know this family. David Johnson is one of the most devoted fathers I've ever met. I've worked with him for years." The final nail dropped. The officers had no defense left. The weight of their errors settled on them like a storm cloud. David looked around, his calm cutting deeper than any shout could. "You doubted me, not because of what you saw, but because of who I am." He took Maya's hand firmly. "You judged us by your fears, not by our truth. And that ends now." The next morning, the story of David and Maya had already exploded across headlines and social media. Single black father wrongly accused of kidnapping his own daughter trended everywhere, sparking outrage and conversations about prejudice, assumptions, and the quiet battles single parents often fight. News outlets replayed shaky footage from bystanders who had recorded part of the incident. The sight of little Maya crying in her father's arms while officers questioned him struck a painful chord with millions. Yet what stood out most wasn't the injustice, but David's calm strength in the face of humiliation. He hadn't lashed out or lost control. He had stood firm, his words cutting deeper than anger ever could. Messages of support poured in from around the world. Letters, phone calls, donations from Maya's school fund, and even invitations to share his story publicly. Standing in their small living room, David held Maya as she asked innocently, "Daddy, are people still mad at us?" He smiled softly, brushing her hair back. "No, sweetheart. They're mad at what happened, and now they're listening." Later that week, the mayor himself visited David, offering a public apology and promising reforms in police training to ensure such mistakes wouldn't happen again. But for David, the real victory wasn't political. It was personal. As he walked Maya to school the next day, holding her tiny hand in his, parents and teachers greeted them warmly, no longer with suspicion, but with respect. David knew the road ahead as a single father wouldn't be easy, but he also knew something had changed. They weren't just a father and daughter anymore. They had become a symbol of love, dignity, and resilience. And as the sun rose over the city, David whispered to Maya, "They thought they could break us, but all they did was make us stronger." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Subscribe now to Black Stories for more powerful and emotional stories every week.